you interviewing for your new role and don't know what to expect during that initial interview? Well, today I got you covered. We're talking about that initial interview that you're having with that recruiter or hiring manager. I'm going to tell you what to expect and how to handle it. If you're new to my channel, welcome. This is Patrick Recruiter. My name's Patrick. I have nearly a decade of experience helping companies scale from just a handful of employees to hundreds. I have literally conducted hundreds and hundreds of initial phone and video interviews with candidates across a wide variety of sectors of the business, so I'd love to give you insight into what to expect and how to handle it. So whether you're the one being interviewed or potentially you're interviewing somebody else for the first time, let's dive into it. That way you're fully prepared for that initial interview. First off, what is an initial interview? How do you even get there? So after you apply to a job, your resume goes through an ATS. Those are those applicant tracking systems where you have to input your resume, potentially input your information twice, depending on what type of applicant tracking system it is. But that houses all your information. You submit your resume, you submit potentially your references, your contact information. It goes into the system. It is then reviewed, hopefully by a human being, a recruiter, to determine whether or not your resume fits the needs of that particular role. Assuming your resume is flagged to move forward in the process, the next step would be for you to have an initial interview. That interview could be conducted by a recruiter, a hiring manager, or in today's world, AI bots. I have a separate video on how to prepare for AI bots, so check that out. I'll link it in the description below. When you get scheduled for that initial interview, should probably only last anywhere from 20 to 30 minutes. Sometimes it could go over a little bit if you have additional questions, or perhaps you're talking directly to the hiring manager and you want to keep that interview going a little bit more because they'll have more detail about the role. Might be wise to book off 45 minutes for those initial interviews just in case they do go over, but definitely plan on at least 20 minutes, probably around 30 minutes for that first initial interview. An initial interview is typically a high-level walkthrough. It begins with your experience. A recruiter's probably going to ask, can you give me like a walkthrough of your background experience? It's definitely a high-level question, but this is your opportunity to craft your pitch and tell that interviewer about your background. A great pitch is only about 2 to 3 minutes long. It walks through your experience. It highlights your key roles, how you got to where you are, and the major accomplishments that happened at some of those positions. If you are really smart, you tie in those accomplishments to the actual role or company that you're interviewing with. So that typically kicks off the interview. It's just you explaining a little bit about your background, how you got to where you are. Practice your pitch. My recommendation is always video record yourself doing your pitch. That way you can go back and watch it and improve upon it for future interviews. After that initial kickoff of covering your background and experience, the interviewer is going to dive into your most recent role, your current role, whatever is most applicable to the role that you're interviewing for. And you have to be ready for a couple of different things. You got to be able to speak to the specifics of actually what it is that you did in your current or your previous roles. What were you building? Maybe what were you selling? What were you marketing? What were the goals that you had? Did you achieve those goals? Did you hit KPI numbers that were tied to your success? What did your team structure look like? Who did you work with? Who did you report to? Who were the key stakeholders that you were working with as well? All this is important information and something that you can expect to dive into when you have that first initial interview. This is a really great opportunity in the interview to discuss and share the impact that you made in your current role or previous roles that are applicable to the role that you're interviewing for. At the end of the day, the interviewer wants to get familiar with your background and your experience and what you were good at and how you were successful. Separately, I always like to dive into the tools that you've used. So not only are you talking about your experience, what you did, kind of the day-to-day, but like what did you actually use? If you're an engineer, be able to speak to the languages that you can actually code in. Are you front end or back end? Or you're a full stack engineer? What were you building in? If you're in sales, for example, account executives, what tools were you using? What was the CRM? If you're on the marketing side, what was the email marketing tool that you used? How often did you use it? How much skill set do you have with that particular tool? Or do you know other tools as well that you used or technologies that you use to help be successful in past roles that might be applicable to this role? So it's always great to be able to speak to the tools and the technologies that you used in previous roles, because that gives the interviewer a little bit more insight into kind of your technical abilities. Also, if the tools relate to the role that you're interviewing for, it'd be great to highlight those and highlight your experience with those, because if you're joining a new company and you don't need the time to ramp up on those tools, you already have previous experience, that's great to highlight. Versus not highlighting those experience, the interviewer thinking like, hey, this candidate might not have the experience with the particular tools and technologies that we use. Potentially we'll go with somebody else. And that's just because you didn't highlight that during the actual interview. So after speaking about your accomplishments, dive into tools and technologies that you use that help you be successful in that particular role and that are applicable to the role that you're interviewing for. Okay, so up to now, you covered a couple different things during this initial phone call. Shared a high-level overview of your experience and background, dove into your current or previous roles that are applicable to this role. You shared information around those roles and the specifics around what you actually did and the accomplishments that you had. And fourth, you shared your experience with the tools and technologies that are relevant to this particular position to showcase that you are knowledgeable, utilizing different tools, and can come in and hit the ground running if you were hired in this role. The next topic that most interviewees can expect during that initial interview is around why you left your current or your previous role. You have to have an answer prepared for that. It could be as simple, hey, the company I'm working with had a reduction in force, i.e. layoffs. My job was unfortunately impacted. Or the company I'm working with now, I'm not kind of sure about the direction. It's grown a lot since I've been here. Some things have happened and I'm looking to jump into a smaller company or a new company that I can better align with. It could be, hey, I've been watching your company for the past couple of years. I've been really interested. I saw this role. It was a great fit for my background and experience. I'm kind of happy here, but I've really been watching your company. I'd be really interested in joining the mission that you guys are building. And if this role is a great fit, great. If not, I'm happy where I am. It could be any of those answers, but be prepared to have some type of answer to that question, why are you on the job market? The next step of the initial interview is really kind of forward thinking. A great interviewer will want to know, like, ideally, what are you looking for in your next role? Specifically, they might ask, like, what are the 3 must-haves that you're looking for in your next position? That was always a question I asked. Having that information was really critical because if this candidate gets through the whole interview process, I'm gonna use their 3 must-haves during that final negotiation to make sure that we check all the boxes there to hopefully close that candidate. So I recommend to any interviewer out there, what are like the 3 must-haves that you're looking for in your next role? As an interviewee receiving that question, be prepared. Like, what ideally are you looking for in your next role? Is it the company that you're looking for, the team size, the company size, the stage of the company? Is it compensation related? For sure. Is it a remote versus a hybrid versus an on-site situation? Hey, you really need awesome benefits for you and your family. Identify this information. That way you can do 2 things. You can share this information with the company, and then if they don't meet those needs, at least you know. And then separately, share this information with the company as a way of like checking the boxes on your side. Like, does this company actually meet the needs that I'm actually looking for in my next role that makes this an opportunity that I want to pursue forward? So now we're up to the interesting questions, I'd say, and definitely something a recruiter is probably going to ask versus a hiring manager. And that's around timeline and compensation. It's definitely kind of a touchy subject, kind of depends where you live. There are different rules out there. Hopefully the job description has a compensation range so you can know going into the call, like, hey, yes, this is within my range. If not, a recruiter is definitely going to ask you, what are you looking to make? If they ask you what you were last making in your last role or what you're currently making now, they technically can't really ask you that question, so you don't have to answer that question. But they should be asking is, what are you looking to make in your next role? This is your opportunity to explain the range and what you're looking to target in your next opportunity. Or this is really your opportunity to turn it around on the interviewer and the recruiter and say like, hey, what is the actual compensation range that you have budgeted for the role? Let them give you an answer. That way you can best say like, yes, that fits within my range. Now, let's say they say it's between 100 and 120K base. Yes, that's within your range. I was hoping to land around 115 or so. At least at that point, like the compensation makes sense. If they give you a compensation range that's super low, let's say it's between 60 and 80K, but you're really looking to make a minimum of 95 to 110 base, it doesn't make sense. At that point, you can kind of call that out and be like, hey, unfortunately, just based off my prior experience and what I'm currently making now or what I was making, I need to be at 100K base to at least make this make sense to move forward. You're not at that range. Potentially, the recruiter, if they think you're a great candidate, could have just been lowballing you, and now they have an opportunity to come up, let's say, and be like, hey, actually, we might be able to make that work if this is the right candidate. Or they'll just say, hey, this isn't the right range. we're down here, you're up there, this doesn't make sense. So the compensation is a touchy subject, but you as a candidate coming into it, be prepared. Have an ideal range in mind, turn it on the interviewer, ask them what is the actual compensation range that you have dedicated for this role. They have to give you a compensation range. Doesn't necessarily have to be true, but they have to give you a compensation range. Then take that information. If it's within your range, fantastic. If it's above your range, even better. If it's below your targeted range, then you have to respond to the actual recruiter and say, unfortunately, my target range is between X and Y, 95 to 115, for example, and you're not within that range. So it's always great to talk compensation. I think people are fearful about compensation, that they'll like budget themselves out. But the trick here is to reverse the question on the recruiter or the interviewer. Let them give you a compensation first. That way you can determine whether or not it's in your range, and hopefully it's above the range that you're looking for. That would be even great. You'll get this question more from a recruiter than a hiring manager, just because they typically aren't thinking about this. But a recruiter will also typically end the interview with a question revolving around your interview activity, i.e. like, where else are you interviewing? What's going on with your process? They want to get a sense of how active you are on the actual job market. Are you early in stage, speaking with a couple companies all kind of at this stage, or are you close to a final round interview with the company and you're anticipating an offer within the next week? That kind of dictates where things might go. If you're a great candidate and the recruiter thinks you're going to be potentially an awesome fit for the role, let's say they're this awesome unicorn type candidate, then potentially the recruiter might want to move you forward in the process quicker if they know you're waiting on an offer as well. So you could kind of use that as a candidate perhaps and be like, hey, I'm actually interviewing a couple different roles. Some are in the later stages, some are in the early stages. You know, what does the interview process look like from here moving forward? It's a great opportunity for you to ask the recruiter what is expected for future interviews. That gives you two things. One, does the actual company have an interview process? Two, does it seem like this recruiter is going to move you forward in the process? Because if they don't talk about next steps, then chances are you're not going to move forward. Whereas if you're discussing next steps, you might move forward. And then three, can kind of give you a timeline on what you can expect. That way you can compare that to other companies that you're interviewing with. Feel free to share whatever information you want to the recruiter around your interview activity. They typically ask it, that way they know what's going on in your process and can also use that information to dictate whether or not they should move faster or slower with your application. This might seem like a lot of information to go through in around 30 minutes, but telling you it's completely doable. So you talked about a couple different things up to this point. Your background and experience, the roles that you worked at now or worked for previously that are relevant to the current position, your accomplishments in those roles, the tools and technologies in those roles, why you're on the job market. You discuss what you're looking for in your next position, you discuss compensation, and then timeline, i.e. where else are you interviewing? Now it's time for you to actually start interviewing the company and asking them questions. Come prepared with questions. Do your research up front. In today's job climate, if you are getting an initial interview, it's very rare. There are so many applicants out there for all types of roles. I've been speaking with candidates that are only getting 1, 2, maybe 3 interviews in the past few months. So if you are getting an actual initial interview, be prepared. Have detailed questions about the company, about the role, about the benefits, about whatever it is. That way you're coming off super knowledgeable and also showing interest in that company and role. And the recruiter will feel that as well, that you're extremely interested in the role. It also puts the company in the interviewee seat and puts you in the interviewer seat because you're determining whether or not this role and company is a great fit for you versus the other way around. So that is what you can expect during an initial interview. So remember to stay prepared, practice your pitch, and have clear priorities that you're looking for in your next role. That way you can determine whether or not this company and this position is the right fit for you. If you found this video helpful, check out some of my other videos. One is around ghost jobs and the rise of fake job postings all across the internet. And the other one is around AI and how it's taking over recruiting, and more specifically, how AI bots are conducting these first round initial interviews. Like, subscribe, and leave any questions in the comments below, and good luck at your next first round interview.